Welcome back. Let's continue from our last video. In the previous video, you saw Digron Tyron raising his hand to strike Dane. However, Dane, quick-witted and with incredible reflexes, swiftly countered by headbutting Digron in the face, breaking his nose and causing him to bleed. Enraged, Digron swore to eliminate Dane, to which Dane boldly challenged him to try. Hearing Dane's provocation, the hot blood within Tyron boiled over. He declared that Dane had lost his mind and that they would fight to the end. Beside him, his younger brother, clearly worried, urged him to worry about his nose first, but Tyron barked at him to stay out of it and immediately charged at Dane to teach him a lesson. However, with his first punch, Dane simply took a light step back, effortlessly dodging the attack. Tyron growled in frustration, calling Dane a slippery little brat. As for Dane, watching Tyron's clumsy, untrained moves, he instantly realized that this boy was not a seasoned fighter, deducing that he must be either a mage or a summoner based on his stance and footwork. Meanwhile, Tyron flailed his arms, throwing punches and kicks that failed to even graze Dane's clothes. Tyron huffed, panting heavily like an exhausted ox, complaining that Dane was too fast to catch. On Dane's side, while easily dodging each blow, he had enough leisure to let his mind wander. He pondered the flow of magic he sensed at that moment, wondering if he could control it with sheer willpower and manifest it physically, deciding to try it out now, the idea filling him with thrilling excitement. Following his instinct, streams of mana began to surge rapidly into his palm, gathering at a blinding speed. Then, with a resounding boom, a powerful burst of energy exploded outward as Dane unleashed his magic. The force blasted Tyron's body backward like a ragdoll, sending him crashing to the ground with a loud thud that echoed through the garden. Tyron let out a groan of pain, coughing violently from the impact. The blast had been so powerful that even the stone-paved ground was left with a deep, jagged groove. Seeing the devastation around him, Dane suddenly felt a pang of worry, realizing with a jolt that the flower garden was completely ruined. He then turned his gaze back toward Tyron, the young noble who, despite suffering a heavy blow, managed to push himself up, trembling but conscious. Understanding dawned on Tyron's bruised face, and his voice, filled with both fear and fury, exclaimed his disbelief that Dane could use magic, demanding to know who he was. Meanwhile, Tyron's younger brother, noticing his siblings' growing rage and recognizing the danger of their situation, tugged at his arm, desperately urging him to stop before something really bad happened. In response to his younger brother's warning, the older boy grew even more furious, so much so that his head seemed ready to burst into flames as he told his brother to get out of his way, insisting he would deal with Dane himself. His reason completely clouded by anger, Tyron began muttering an incantation, and as the chant echoed, black mana began to surge violently around him, enveloping his body in dark energy. Seeing this display, Dane's eyes narrowed as he immediately recognized what was happening. A summoner, just as he suspected. A swirling vortex of energy appeared behind Tyron, and from within the portal, the head of a large wolf emerged, leaping out in a flash. Watching his summoned beast materialize, Tyron's mouth curled into a smug grin, his laughter dripping with arrogance as he declared that this was Genpu, his summoned beast, and now Dane would understand the price for daring to mess with Digron Tyron. He jabbed a finger toward Dane, commanding Genpu to tear him apart limb from limb. On Dane's side, he watched the scene unfold, and upon realizing Tyron had only summoned an ordinary wolf, his expression soured with disappointment, thinking that it was just a common wolf and nothing compared to Sister Arabella who could summon dragons. Meanwhile, Tyron continued barking orders, telling Genpu to go for Dane's throat and rip him to shreds. At his command, the wolf lunged forward, its sharp fangs bared, rushing straight toward Dane. But something strange happened as it locked eyes with the calm, composed young noble. An inexplicable aura seemed to emanate from him. The wolf skidded to a halt, planting its four paws firmly into the ground to stop itself. Then, to the utter bewilderment of both Tyron and his brother, the beast's fiery red glow began to fade, replaced by a serene blue hue. Genpu, the fearsome summoned creature, lowered its head in submission before Dane. Tyron blinked, his disbelief palpable, questioning what was happening and why Genpu wasn't tearing out Dane's throat as commanded. The younger brother, his mouth agape, muttered whether it was wagging its tail. Tyron's face twisted in confusion and rage, repeatedly demanding that Genpu attack and tear Dane apart, but his furious commands had no effect. Genpu remained utterly loyal, standing obediently by Dane's side. Dane slowly extended his hand and gently stroked the wolf's fur, which caused the creature to wag its tail even more enthusiastically. "Good boy," Dane murmured softly, still puzzled by the sudden shift in the beast's behavior. Thinking back, he recalled how even Arabella's summoned beasts had always been oddly friendly toward him. At the time, he had simply assumed it was because they shared the same bloodline, but now, in a situation completely unrelated to family ties, another thought crept into his mind. Perhaps he possessed some innate affinity for magical creatures. Of course, that also meant Digron's level of favorability had likely hit rock bottom. Turning his attention to Digron, who was still shaking his head in disbelief, the young noble refused to accept what had just unfolded, bellowing that it made no sense and questioning how a summoned beast could betray its master. Hearing this, Dane shot him a glance filled with amusement, asking if he still wanted to continue. The brown-haired boy clenched his fists in frustration, growling that Dane was a little something, his temper flaring once again. But the scene left his younger brother practically in tears, begging him to stop, saying they had lost and it was over. "Shut up," Digron barked, his voice trembling with fury, declaring he would cancel the summoning right now. Unbeknownst to him, however, canceling the summoning would leave him with absolutely no recourse, nothing but his bare hands to fight with. His younger brother, clearly understanding this far better than Digron himself, continued pleading desperately for him to listen. Actually, the boy's words trailed off, his hesitation drawing Digron's attention. Then, with a sinking dread, Denner noticed a growing warmth spreading down his legs, a dark, unmistakable stain spreading across his trousers. His face turned crimson with embarrassment, his eyes bulging in sheer humiliation as he muttered through clenched teeth that this was so shameful while his brother looked away in silent horror. On seeing their state, Dane kindly offered some advice, mentioning that the bathroom was on the first floor of the main building. However, instead of gratitude, Digron grabbed his brother's arm and stormed off, calling out for Dane to wait right there, saying he would be back soon and telling Dinar to come on. With that, the two brothers hurried away, leaving Dane shaking his head in exasperation, grumbling inwardly that they should at least dismiss their summoned beast. Time passed swiftly until the late afternoon. Dane, having nothing better to do, decided to experiment with summoning magic, musing that it was simpler than he thought. He recalled how Lady Claire had taught him and, using her method, carefully severed the faint link between Digron and Genpu, replacing it with his own connection. He pondered the fact that he, someone with no talent for summoning, had managed this just because of affinity levels. As he was thinking this, a sudden voice boomed behind him, rough and commanding, asking if that was the brat who bullied him. "Yes, that's the one," Digron snarled, pointing directly at Dane, who turned inside as he watched Digron return with reinforcements. The fool went and made things worse, Dane thought. "He didn't just bully me and Dinar," Digron's voice rose, thick with anger and indignation. "He also broke the bond between me and Genpu." Finally, a massive man with a face like a sweaty pig waddled toward Dane, his expression a mix of haughtiness and disdain. "I am Mogard Tyrant, head of House Tyrant, one of the great noble families," he announced, asking if Dane was the boy who injured his son and stole his summoned beast. Dane, unfazed, replied flatly that he was. As he spoke, his eyes glanced over Mogard's bloated frame, and he thought that Mogard looked even fatter than when he had captured him on the battlefield, concluding that peace must be treating him well. Unaware of Dane's inner thoughts, Mogard pointed a chubby finger at him, saying that as a guest, he might have been willing to let this slide, but this was no minor matter. Questioning what a boy like Dane was doing there all alone and demanding his name and rank at once. With a cold smirk, Dane obliged, stating his name as Dane Sogres, youngest son of Arkan Sogres, Lord of the South and head of the Sogres family. At his words, beads of sweat began to form on the foreheads of both father and son. "What?" Mogard stammered, his eyes widening in horror, realizing this brat was Dane. However, a plan quickly hatched in his mind. "The youngest son of the Sogres family," he sneered inwardly. "It seems the tables have turned. I was humiliated as a prisoner of war by Argrick and gained nothing from that defeat, but now I can use this opportunity to demand compensation from the Sogres Count. I'll make him answer for this and use it as leverage to secure mining rights. Those aristocrats who look down on me will bow at my feet." With this cunning thought, a smirk crept onto his face, and he shifted his tone to sound more amicable, asking if Dane was the host of this birthday banquet. "Yes," Dane replied calmly, his demeanor completely unshaken. He felt a surge of anger boil within him at the boy's composed attitude, fuming silently that he hadn't traveled all the way to the desolate southern lands just to celebrate Dane's birthday. His teeth ground together as he seethed, but he forced a smile and clapped a hand on his son's shoulder, asking what Dane intended to do about this, pointing out that he had injured his son, a guest at his party, and even stolen his summoned beast, declaring this a crime. "That's right, today will be the end of you," Digron chimed in triumphantly, adding that he would demand Count Sogres take responsibility and let his father go. Of course, Dane had no intention of backing down so easily, stating that he understood, but before that, he demanded an apology. At Dane's calm yet firm request, the faces of the father and son turned a deep shade of purple as if their veins might burst. "An apology? Are you insane? This is absurd." Before they could finish their outrage, Dane raised his voice, confirming that he did punch Digron in the nose and injure him, but it was in self-defense because Digron had threatened him. He also stated that he didn't steal Genpu, explaining that Digron's summoned beast came to him of its own free will. What? Digron yelled, his voice cracking with disbelief, insisting that Genpu would never do that and accusing Dane of lying. Unlike his furious son, Mogard's eyes narrowed as a thought took hold. Wait a minute, the Sogres family. I heard their second daughter is a summoning prodigy. Could she have taught him how to sever a bond? Stroking his chin thoughtfully, he contemplated the possibility before speaking again, conceding that even if Dane's story was true, losing a summoned beast was a grievous tragedy, yet Dane was asking for an apology. Yes, I am, Dane answered steadily. Sogres' expression twisted, his frustration palpable as he stared down the unflinching boy. Digron, meanwhile, kept yapping like an overly excited dog, wondering who this brat thought he was, acting so high and mighty and interrupting while adults were talking, calling him arrogant. His constant noise made Mogard sigh inwardly, thinking that talking to this boy was giving him a headache. Taking a deep breath, Mogard lowered his voice slightly, saying all right, fine. He wouldn't scold Dane anymore, and they would see what Count Sogres had to say about this. When Mogard turned his attention back to Dane, he noticed the calm expression on the boy's face. A flicker of amusement crossed Dane's mind as he realized Mogard was looking forward to this. Just as the conversation was reaching its peak, the sharp clatter of footsteps broke the tension. The figures of Count Arkan Sogres and Duke Bout Thermion appeared, both cutting imposing silhouettes as they approached. Are you looking for me? Arkan's deep voice rang out, causing everyone to stiffen in surprise. Count Sogres, Mogard muttered under his breath, his attempt at bravado faltering. Even Digron swallowed nervously as the presence of both powerful nobles loomed over them. Time slipped by as the sun finally dipped beneath the horizon, casting long shadows over the scene. Digron, however, was already spinning a tale from his own twisted perspective, beginning by saying he was walking through the garden with his little brother and they got lost. So he kindly asked the Count's son to show them the way. His voice took on a dramatic lilt as he spoke. From where he stood, Dane watched his father's calm expression and felt a swell of admiration, thinking that was his father for him, always composed, fair, and deeply protective of his family but not one to blindly favor anyone, even in disputes like this. Digron, oblivious to Dane's thoughts, continued weaving his story, his tone growing more exaggerated as he reached the fabricated climax, claiming that Dane then punched him right in the nose, using some strange technique to humiliate him. He insisted he was terrified, so he only summoned his beast to scare Dane off, and then Dane stole it and even tried to attack him again. As Digron finished, he put on a woeful expression, his eyes wide with mock vulnerability, as though he were the most unfortunate victim. His father, Mogard, chuckled softly, clearly amused at how convincingly his son could twist the truth. Dane, on the other hand, sighed inwardly, thinking Digron could lie so effortlessly while keeping a straight face, truly impressive, and wondering what his future held. Finally, when Digron had run out of steam, Mogard straightened his back and spoke to Count Arkan, stating that he had intended only to warn his boy, but theft of a summoned beast was serious and couldn't simply be overlooked. In response to these words, Arkan calmly said that they could not listen to only one side and that he wanted to hear Dane's story before evaluating the entire situation and reaching a conclusion. If Mogard was concerned about his judgment, Arkan suggested that Duke Thermion offer his perspective as well. While speaking, Arkan gestured toward Thermion, who stood beside him, and Thermion nodded in agreement with the proposal, stating that if Arkan required his involvement, he would assist in resolving the matter. On the other side, noticing Thermion's intervention in the discussion, the faces of Mogard and his son grew visibly pale, and an uneasy thought crept into Mogard's mind, cursing under his breath that Thermion's involvement would only complicate matters further, and that he had a bad feeling about this situation. While Mogard was lost in his anxious reflections, Arkan turned toward Dane and asked him to explain the events, prompting Dane to ponder briefly, thinking that merely recounting what had happened would suffice. With this thought in mind, he began to speak truthfully, though with some minor deviations from the actual events, admitting that certain things Sogres' son had claimed were indeed true. However, he pointed out that the garden they had painstakingly nurtured had been trampled upon recklessly, and it was Mogard's son who had become angry and grabbed someone else's collar. Liar! Since when did that happen? Digron, Mogard's son, shouted in protest when he heard Dane's words. Meanwhile, Arkan's face darkened, veins visibly bulging in his temples, but he forced himself to maintain composure and instructed Dane to continue. Hearing his father's words, Dane spoke up again, adding that he had heard very clearly when Digron summoned Genpu, he ordered it to kill him, and that he hadn't stolen the summoned beast. It came to him because it saw his kindness. I never stole his summoned beast, Dane spoke loudly and confidently. At this point, Mogard, unable to hold back upon hearing the completely different story, intervened, saying it was nonsense and questioning how someone who wasn't a summoner could take control of a summoned beast, suggesting that Dane must have used some secret technique. In response to this, Dane explained that he had an innate connection with summoned beasts, and a summoned beast that wasn't close to its master would recognize him as its master. Mogard sarcastically responded, finding it funny. While Arkan, not well versed in summoning magic, couldn't verify the truth of the claim, he asked if that was really possible. Dane confidently replied that it was, reaffirming his statement. Turning back to Mogard, despite being extremely nervous, Mogard stubbornly laughed and said, "Haha, Dane didn't want them to believe that, did he?" Before Mogard could say more, Thermion, acting as a mediator, took a moment to think and then suggested they should prove it with the summoned beast. Upon hearing this, the faces of Mogard and his son stiffened, realizing the Duke had intervened. Turning to Arkan upon hearing the suggestion, Arkan patted his son's shoulder and asked Dane if he could prove it. Dane confidently replied, "Yes, father." Meanwhile, Mogard turned to look at his son as if to assess the situation, but Digron's face twisted with anxiety, wondering what was happening as he couldn't summon Genpu anymore. The boy was sweating, panic rising, and Mogard, unaware of this, noticed his son's inaction and reminded him to hurry up and summon it. "Father, I can't," Digron stammered, and Mogard yelled in disbelief, questioning how he couldn't summon the beast he summoned several times a day. Seeing the confused expressions on the faces of Mogard and his son, Dane couldn't help but smirk, thinking that he had severed the connection, so of course Digron couldn't summon it now. With this thought in mind, Dane turned to Arkan and said, "Father, he would summon it now, but to do this, it seemed he needed the mark that Digron possessed." Hearing this, Digron turned to question Dane, asking what he had said about his mark, expressing disbelief that Dane wanted his mark and calling it ridiculous, adding that even if Dane used the mark of another summoner, it wouldn't work. In response to this, Lord Sogres also sternly said that based on what Dane was saying, even if the boy used Digron's mark, it wouldn't have any effect. So what was the harm in trying? Wasn't that right? Wasn't it supposed to prove Digron's words? Damn it, Digron thought in fear, realizing that he couldn't refute the point since Lord Sogres was correct. Meanwhile, Mogard, with no other choice, turned to his son and told him to show them his mark. But Father Digron hesitated, his eyes beginning to well up. "Hurry up," Mogard shouted. Helpless, Digron reluctantly brought out his personal mark. A summoner's mark is unique. No one else can use it, but Dane, thinking to himself, knew that the summoning mark was just a medium and the real connection came from Genpu's bond to Digron, which was summoned with Dane's magic and would respond to his call. Then, before everyone's eyes, as Dane channeled his magic into Digron's summoning card, an energy vortex appeared, and from within it, a wolf emerged before Dane. The wolf happily licked his face. Despite hearing Dane's words beforehand, everyone was still stunned when they saw the scene unfold. "Father, how is this possible?" "Genpu, my Genpu," Digron and Mogard stuttered, disbelief on their faces. "Amazing," Duke Bout Thermion said in awe, asking Arkan if he hadn't said the boy had never studied summoning magic. "Yes, that's right," Arkan replied in a daze. Meanwhile, Dane gently petted Genpu and whispered an apology for summoning him just for this, but thanked him for appearing. "Damn it, this is a disaster," Mogard thought to himself, feeling the situation spiral out of control. After Dane recalled the summoned beast, Arkan spoke up again, asking what they should do now that they had confirmed the boy summoned the beast, questioning if Mogard acknowledged that Dane was right. Hearing this, Mogard could only force a strained laugh, saying it seemed they had misunderstood about the stolen summoned beast and that his son never intended to kill Dane. "Right, yes, I just wanted to scare him a little. I never meant to kill him," Digron quickly explained. "See, the boy didn't mean that," Mogard chuckled as if trying to end the matter there. Faced with these words, Dane clenched his fists in frustration, thinking that this bastard just made up his own story, growing angrier. Just as Dane was about to decide what to do next, suddenly a voice interrupted, drawing everyone's attention. That's not the case. Everyone turned and saw that the newcomer was none other than Layla. That's a wrap. The story continues in my next video. Like and subscribe to stay notified.